One losing trade is manageable. You expected it. It fits within the plan. You close it, note it, move on. Two losses feels different. A small tightening somewhere. A question that was not there before. But still manageable, still within reason. Three losses, and something shifts. Not in the market, not in the strategy, in you. The charts look different now. The same setups that look clean yesterday look uncertain today. Your hand moves slower toward the entry. Your finger hesitates over the mouse. The trade that would have been automatic last week requires 3 extra confirmations this week. And the confidence that felt solid after your last winning period, the quiet certainty that you know what you are doing, has been quietly replaced by something else. Doubt. Not dramatic doubt, not a crisis, just a persistent background question that was not there before. What if something has changed? What if this streak means something? What if the edge is gone? And here is where the damage really begins. Not in the losses themselves, in what the losses do to the next decision, and the one after that, and the one after that. Because a losing streak does not just affect your account, it affects your behavior. And affected behavior produces more losses, which deepens the streak, which further affects the behavior, until the trader who was executing cleanly 2 weeks ago is barely recognizable in the decisions being made today. In this video, we are going to examine exactly why losing streaks are psychologically disproportionate to their financial impact, what is happening neurologically as losses accumulate in sequence, and what the behavioral shift looks like that allows professionals to trade through losing streaks without losing themselves in the process. Let's go deep. One losing trade is manageable. You expected it. It fits within the framework you've built. It produces mild frustration at most, and then it passes. But when losses happen in sequence, when the second follows the first and the third follows the second, something changes in how the brain processes them. They stop feeling like independent events. They start feeling like a pattern. And pattern recognition is one of the most fundamental functions of the human brain. We are wired for it. It is how we learn, how we adapt, how we survive. In most areas of life, recognizing patterns in repeated negative outcomes is exactly the right response. If you touch something hot and get burned 3 times, the pattern is meaningful. Stop touching it. But in trading, in a probabilistic system where outcomes are partially random, sequential losses do not necessarily represent a meaningful pattern. They represent the clustering that is inherent in any probability distribution. A 60% win rate will produce 3 consecutive losses regularly, not as a sign of failure, as the mathematical expression of the remaining 40%. But the brain does not experience it that way. It experiences 3 consecutive losses as signal, as evidence that something has changed, as data that the strategy may no longer be working. And once that interpretation is adopted, once the losses stop feeling random and start feeling meaningful, everything changes. You are no longer seeing probability, you are searching for explanation. And the search for explanation in a random event produces false conclusions. False conclusions produce behavioral changes, and behavioral changes during a normal losing streak transform a temporary variance event into a genuine performance problem, not because the strategy broke, because the interpretation of the streak broke the execution. Let's go inside the brain. Because the psychological impact of a losing streak is not proportional to its financial impact. It is disproportionate. And understanding why changes how you prepare for and respond to inevitable losing periods. The brain processes sequential negative events differently from isolated ones. A single loss activates the stress response briefly. Cortisol rises, the amygdala fires, but the response is acute and relatively short-lived. The system processes the event and returns toward baseline. But sequential losses do not allow this return to baseline. Each loss reactivates the stress response before the previous one has fully resolved. The cortisol from loss 1 has not cleared when loss 2 arrives. The amygdala activation from loss 2 is still elevated when loss 3 occurs. The result is cortisol accumulation, a progressive increase in stress hormone levels that does not reset between events. And accumulated cortisol produces a specific and well-documented set of cognitive effects: narrowed perception, reduced working memory capacity, shortened time horizon in decision-making, increased sensitivity to threat signals, decreased tolerance for uncertainty. Every one of these effects degrades trading performance directly. Narrowed perception means you stop seeing the full picture of the market and focus exclusively on the possibility of further loss. Reduced working memory means the trading plan, the rules, the criteria, the defined edge, becomes harder to hold and apply in real time. Shortened time horizon means decisions that should be evaluated across a series of trades are evaluated on the basis of the last 3. Increased threat sensitivity means every adverse price movement triggers a disproportionate stress response. Decreased uncertainty tolerance means the normal ambiguity of a live market becomes intolerable. There is also a second neurological layer specific to losing streaks: the brain's reward prediction system. Each time a strategy is applied and produces a loss, the reward prediction system updates its expectation downward. It begins to associate the strategy's signals with negative outcomes rather than positive ones. And as this association strengthens across multiple sequential losses, the brain begins generating an avoidance response to the strategy's signals. The setup that should trigger confident execution begins triggering hesitation. The entry criteria that should feel familiar begins feeling uncertain. The plan that should feel like a guide begins feeling like a threat. This is learned helplessness at the neurological level, and it is one of the most significant psychological obstacles a trader can face. Not because the strategy has failed, because the brain has learned to fear it. Part 4. Behavioral breakdown during streaks. As the emotional load accumulates, behavior changes in predictable ways. The first behavioral change is hesitation at valid setups. The strategy presents a qualified entry. Everything aligns, but the accumulated stress response has associated the strategy's signals with recent losses, and that association produces hesitation, a delay between seeing the setup and acting on it, during which the entry level often passes or deteriorates. The trader misses a winner that would have partially offset the streak, which extends the streak's impact on the equity curve and deepens the emotional load further. The second behavioral change is skipping trades entirely. The hesitation becomes so pronounced that the trader does not just delay, they opt out. They watch valid setups develop without participating, protecting themselves from further loss, but also preventing the recovery that consistent execution would produce. The third behavioral change is impulsive size reduction. Operating at smaller size during a losing streak feels like risk management, but when size is reduced impulsively without a predefined rule that determines when and by how much, it is not risk management, it is fear management. And fear-managed sizing means that when the winning trades eventually arrive, their impact on the equity curve is insufficient to offset the losses. The fourth behavioral change, and the most destructive, is impulsive size increase, the inverse response to the same pressure. Instead of protecting against further loss, the trader tries to accelerate recovery, increasing size on subsequent trades to win back the drawdown faster. But larger size on trades taken during a period of compromised execution, when the emotional load is highest and decision quality is lowest, amplifies every mistake. The losing streak that began as normal variance becomes catastrophic through the behavioral response to it. Part 5. The urge to fix it. After multiple losses, the mind generates an overwhelming need for resolution, not patience, resolution now. This need produces a specific set of behaviors that feel rational but are emotionally driven. The first is revenge trading, taking the next trade not because a valid setup has formed, but because the streak needs to end, because the account needs to recover, because the identity needs to be restored. The second is strategy abandonment. After several losses, the conviction that produced the strategy begins to erode. The trader begins looking for alternatives, different indicators, different time frames, different approaches, any change that might break the pattern. But changing the strategy mid-streak does not fix the streak. It resets the sample to 0, and a sample of 0 cannot demonstrate edge. The third is rule violation. Under the pressure of recovery urgency, rules that were non-negotiable become negotiable. Stops are moved, exits are adjusted, entry criteria are relaxed, all in the service of making something happen, of resolving the tension, of ending the streak through force rather than through patience. And all of it makes the streak worse. Not because the strategy is broken, because the behavioral response to the streak has introduced genuine randomness into a system that was built on defined probability. The edge cannot function in randomness, and the trader, observing the continued poor results, concludes the edge is gone, when in reality the edge was destroyed by the response to the streak, not by the streak itself. Part 6. Lessons from professional traders. One principle shared consistently among experienced traders is this: losing streaks are not problems to be solved, they are conditions to be managed. The professional does not approach a losing streak as a puzzle to be figured out. They do not search for the cause. They do not modify the strategy. They do not try to force recovery. They recognize the streak as a normal feature of any probabilistic system, and they manage their behavior accordingly, which means reducing size to the level where the emotional load becomes manageable, which means implementing mandatory pauses between trades to prevent cortisol accumulation, which means reviewing execution, not results, to confirm the process is intact, and which means continuing to execute the system consistently, because consistency during a losing streak is what allows the edge to reassert itself when the distribution returns to its mean. Another principle observed among professionals who have sustained performance through extended losing periods: the streak ends, the behavior must not change. This is the counterintuitive standard that professionals hold during difficult periods. Not that the streak should end quickly, not that recovery should be accelerated, but that behavior, process, execution, discipline must remain constant regardless of the streak's length. Because the professional understands that the moment behavior changes in response to the streak, the strategy is no longer being tested. A strategy whose execution changes during losing periods and recovers during winning periods is not a strategy at all. It is two different approaches applied based on emotional state. And two different approaches cannot produce consistent edge. Consistent edge requires consistent behavior, especially during losing streaks, especially when consistent behavior is hardest. Part 7. The real problem and the real shift. The problem is not losing streaks. Losing streaks are normal, expected, inevitable in any probabilistic trading system. The problem is the inability to remain behaviorally stable during them. And that inability is not a character flaw, it is a preparation gap. Traders who struggle with losing streaks have typically not built the psychological and structural infrastructure to manage them. They have planned for winning. They have not planned for losing sequences. They know what they will do when the setup forms. They do not know what they will do when the third consecutive loss closes. That preparation gap is where the behavioral breakdown occurs. And closing it does not require more willpower. It requires pre-built responses, specific, defined, written in advance responses to the specific scenarios that losing streaks produce. Stop asking, how do I avoid losing streaks? Start asking, how do I behave during them? That shift from avoidance to preparation is the most important psychological transition a trader can make regarding losing streaks. Because avoidance is impossible. Losing streaks will occur, but behavioral stability during them is achievable if it is designed for in advance. Part 8. Practical tools for surviving losing streaks. Let's get concrete. The first tool is the losing streak protocol, written before you ever experience a losing streak, in a calm state. Define specifically what you will do after 2 consecutive losses, after 3, after 4. For example, after 2 consecutive losses, reduce position size by 50% for the remainder of the session. After 3 consecutive losses, close the platform for the day regardless of time. After 4 consecutive losses across 2 sessions, take 1 full trading day off before returning. These responses are not reactive, they are pre-committed, written when the emotional load was 0. And they function as a circuit breaker, interrupting the accumulation of cortisol before it reaches the level where behavioral breakdown becomes inevitable. The second tool is the losing streak reframe card, a physical card or a note at the top of your trading plan containing one statement. A losing streak is not a signal that my strategy has failed. It is a normal expression of the probability distribution. My edge exists over hundreds of trades. This streak is part of that distribution. My job is to execute correctly and allow the distribution to play out. Read before every session during a losing streak, and read again immediately after each loss. This statement, absorbed repeatedly during the streak, gradually interrupts the pattern-seeking interpretation that transforms normal variance into perceived failure. The third tool is the execution audit. After every losing trade during a streak, ask one question before anything else. Did I follow the plan? Not did it work. Did I follow the plan? If yes, the loss is variance. Continue. If no, the loss has a behavioral component. Identify it. Correct it. Continue. This audit keeps the evaluation framework on process rather than outcome during the period when outcome-based evaluation is most psychologically damaging. The fourth tool is the cortisol reset protocol. After any loss, but especially during a streak, implement a mandatory 15-minute break before the next trade. No charts, no analysis, no market-related content. Physical movement if possible, controlled breathing, deliberate disengagement from the trading environment. This 15-minute window allows cortisol levels to begin reducing. It interrupts the accumulation that produces behavioral breakdown, and it returns the trader to the next trade with a slightly lower emotional load than they would carry without the break. Not fully reset, but measurably better. And measurably better compounds across a session, across a week, across a streak, until the streak ends, as all streaks do, and the behavior that was maintained through it allows the edge to express itself cleanly. The streak did not break your strategy. It broke your behavior. And broken behavior during a losing period is not evidence that trading does not work for you. It is evidence that your psychological infrastructure for losing periods needs to be built. Because it was never about the losses. It was always about what the losses do to the next decision. The traders who survive losing streaks are not the ones who experience fewer of them. Every trader with a genuine edge experiences losing streaks regularly, predictably, inevitably. The traders who survive them are the ones who prepared for them, who wrote the protocol before the streak began, who built the reframe before the doubt arrived, who designed the cortisol reset before the accumulation started, who committed to behavioral consistency before the pressure to change became overwhelming. That preparation is not glamorous. It does not feel like trading. It feels like planning for failure. But it is not planning for failure. It is planning for variance. And variance in a probability-based system is not failure. It is the structure within which edge operates. Honor that structure. Prepare for it. Execute through it. And let the distribution do what distributions always do. Return to their mean. Your growth as a trader begins with self-awareness. The rest follows. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, control your mind.